Welcome everybody to animation production workflows. On Friday, your last class for the first week of the animation fellowship. And here we go. So what's going to be the outline for today? We're going to talk about virtual production, the animation workflows, and some of the best practices and a couple of things here and there. A comparison between what a previous generation of studio pipeline was and what it is right now with real time with Unreal as our main tool. A couple of getting started importing animations, best practices. We're just going to brush over them because you will have more content regarding that. Sequencer tools and features, yet again, on top of my class on Monday, we will be touching on a couple more today, mainly subscenes, shots and takes, and doing some editing within our sequencer, treating it as the editorial step of our process. Levels workflow, this one was very requested throughout the week and people kept asking about them. We will finally get to see them in action, level visibility tracks and how they affect our workflow and how we can make use of them. A little bit of folder organization, which is fairly simple. And we will end up the class today creating something that's called a shot-based workflow, which is what the industry actually uses rather than just one camera jumping around or camera cuts. So animation workflows and what a virtual production workflow looks like. I am not going to mention each one of these, but as you can see here on the screen, we go from left to right, from development and pre-production to post. And if you can see this, this blue square here, Unreal touches on almost 70/80% of what we can do today in virtual production, right? So Unreal can go from VFX and previous department to even working with green screen live action, as we've seen in LED walls, and editorial, which we can use Unreal as our final pixel editorial too. It doesn't just have to go out to a post, but we could. You can see that Unreal is not encompassing post and VFX in this one, but we could go into our editorial here and then go outside or keep it in engine for final. Usually it goes outside and it gets a final edit done on another software. But again, we can, if we wanted to, we could go for final pixel here and do post-production within the engine. We do have Unreal Engine final asset creations here. We can touch on TechViz, Previs, and StuntViz. We work with all three of these sections. We do live action, virtual art department, and green screen. And we all come from an idea or a written treatment, right? We go into the very first steps of this story and what we're creating with Unreal, and we already are delving our feet into it, right? We can all the way from the beginning already start using the engine as our previous or as even layout, which is absolutely amazing. So this is what a typical animation studio pipeline looks like without using Unreal as part of the actual pipeline, right? We have story development, we have storyboards, and on our step 2, we go to production, right? We do modeling, we do rigging, we do surfacing, scene assembly, everything we need to start building up our story. And then we create our blocking with a rough layout, with a final layout maybe in the way. And from there, we start doing animation, right? At this point, editorial starts trickling in and we do a little bit of story reel and we start to see some action happening with animatics and layouts. Then we start doing a little bit more work on our shots. We do crowds, we do effects, we do simulations, and we finally end up with image output with lighting, rendering, composition for a final editorial once we added our sound design. So this is what a typical animation studio pipeline looked like in the past. Now, if we're talking a real-time animation studio pipeline, as you can see, every box that has a shade of purple can be or is fully worked with Unreal Engine. So we are already on step 1, building storyboards that could be done within Unreal. And then we have the option here to go for an offline or go into our story reel within Unreal and start all the way from the top with Unreal, right? And then we go to production where we could in theory do modeling and rigging, air quotes. Modeling, yes, it's been around for a couple of versions of the engine now. It's getting more robust. UEFN actually has a very interesting way of categorizing modeling tools, which I hope come soon into actual Unreal, right? UEFN has a different way of categorizing them, and it's actually looking way better as UI-wise than the one we currently have in 5.2. And I believe also 5.3 doesn't have it yet. Rigging is, we had a small discussion yesterday while in Control Rig class with my mentor, dear old friend, Gabe, where we were having a discussion on the side that if rigging meant adding controls to an existing skeleton or adding the skeleton and then proceeding with the skinning process, right? Adding the bones would be called a rigging process and then skinning. So there was a little bit of a back and forth there. With good arguments on both sides. So if we are talking adding controls to a skeleton, then Unreal can do that right now. If we are talking adding bones and then proceeding with the skinning process, Unreal will or should be able to do so in 5.3. There is already a preview out and it's currently working in 5.3, right? Then we have obviously surfacing, and then we follow on one of the steps where we are doing other asset export from another DCCs and we bring them into Unreal. That's obviously where Unreal doesn't really work or touch because we are outside of the engine completely. But on the next step, we're doing full Unreal. We're doing scene assembly, Unreal, fully inside the engine. Then we have performance capture and our first unit preview, right? Everything then trickles into our first sequencer, which we touched on Monday, and it is our hub, right? Sequencer is where everything lives when we're doing a linear content creation, right? So we have all our cameras, we have all our animations, we are going to have all our effects, we're going to have probably lighting switches, which I'm going to show how to do today. We're going to have post-processing volumes getting animated. We're going to have, I don't know, everything. We can have a lot of things in sequencer, like we mentioned on Monday, right? So we start defining our worlds and our shots. Our sub-level definition is also important. We're referencing assets exports. We're doing animation. We're coming from performance and we're creating already this animation and we're setting it up into our sequencer. If we need to, we can play with Alembics and FBX preparations. And then we're starting to get close to our final layer, right? Our second assembly, which we're going to be working a little bit today on what a, not necessarily what a first assembly or a second assembly is, but we could mention, or we could say that what we did on Monday was our first assembly, right? Our camera cuts track with that track being split with different cameras to then generate those shots perfect perspective, right? But today, like I mentioned in the tagline, we are going to work on a shot-based workflow, which we won't be using a camera cuts track. We will be using a shots track, which will now define what a final assembly is, or what we usually call a master sequencer, right? So that would be this final layer or sequencer second assembly, with obviously our shots enhancements, lighting, effects, sims, post-processing, or anything we need. And finally, we go into UE5 rendering. And if we wanted to, we can go on a final offline edit, right? This is what a real-time animation studio pipeline would look like today if we inject Unreal Engine as the main tool of content creation, right? Obviously, sound design is here at the left side. We can do sound design in Unreal. Unreal is capable. Might not be amazing at it as it is on the visual side of creations, of linear content creation, but yes, it can do it, right? So practical differences, right? What we just talked about, traditional CG and then real-time CG. So front-loaded story process, right? We have the story process created at the beginning, and then we start building into it on a traditional CG, while in Unreal, it's constantly changing because our edit is already in engine and we can keep working on it and switching it on off, switching shots from left to right. We can keep working on it and having fun with it throughout the entire process, right? A delivery shot construction process, this also adds on top of what I was just mentioning. We have live action shot construction in Unreal. We can, again, say, okay, no, this camera needs to be moved. This camera, we can play around with the shot. We can move it to shot 4. We can make shot 3.5 or 310, as it would be called. It's great, right? It's very organic and very dynamic, right? We're moving from a very rigid and solid way of working in a pipeline to a very versatile and fluid way of working, right? So editorial and layout as the production hub, where we have sequencer in Unreal, team govern after pre-production, and then we have director centric during the entire process. Because again, since we have so much control over all of the steps of this process, the director can be very present on this workflow, and it doesn't have to be an email once a week that sends an entire week back of work because he wanted to change or they wanted to change, right? More interactive revision processes, that's what I was mentioning a second ago, whereas in the traditional CG, we have less interactive. And then we have layer rendering output on a traditional CG, where then it has to be built on top of on a final composition on an offline. And in Unreal, we could spit out final pixels, right? So animation workflows, animating an engine, a little bit about this on a slide. So we talked about character asset construction, modeling. We mentioned that we could animate static meshes. We're not only animating actual deformable meshes or skeletal meshes, we also animate static meshes. Rigging, again, we just mentioned that a little bit. Surfacing or MetaHuman creator. We create our MetaHuman and then we send it in. Performance capture obviously needs to be done with a live link, but it can be done in engine or through a performance that we already have, do animation, and we create our very first sequencer, our first assembly, right? So we could import performance captures, anim assets, which would be animation sequences. You've seen about this already. Duplicate them and start trimming them. Obviously, one of the first things that happens when we're doing mocap is that the actor is just walking around a little bit and then we yell, okay, action. And then he does a little bit of a performance and then we stop and then take two, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Once we are importing that information into Unreal, we end up with 3,000 frames, right? So within those animation assets, we are able to trim them down and chop them into smaller pieces. So we don't need to have all those wasted keyframes that will obviously make our engine slug, and then it will make our sequencer super, super long or hard to deal with, right? So we have, we assemble animation subtracks, which is what we just cleared a little bit from the mockup, and we could start playing with some bone matching, with some blend tracks. Again, there's classes on these, so don't panic. But essentially, just as a quick mention, bone matching is what it's used generally for root motion walk cycles, for example. That's the most basic example. If we have a walk cycle that has root motion, the character will walk forward, and at some point, it will literally snap back to 0 position. We cannot loop the animation, right? Because it has root motion. It's not walking in place, and then we'll simply animate the transform. It will move forward. So what we do with Unreal is, again, there's a whole class in this, move a second sequence, copy a second sequence exactly the same. So we get the same result. It will snap back to the beginning, but we tell the second sequence, hey, why don't you go look for the bone of this same skeleton in the previous sequence and make that your starting point. So we're matching a bone, so bone matching, right? And at that point, we usually go for the hip, and the engine goes, oh, okay, here's a hip of the new animation. Let's match them, and there you go. You have a root motion that actually moves throughout the two sequences, right? Blend tracks, you have been seeing these with Sir a couple of days ago, and there's going to be way more with this, which means mounting one track of animation on top of the other, or playing with weights if we have them stacked instead of mounted on top of each other. And then we do have a couple of options here, right? We can add keyframes to transform to a transform track to, for example, move a character if we do not have any root motion, or we could go with an inverse solve to bake to control rig, which we have in both steps because we obviously do want to refine our mockups. We were talking slightly about that yesterday in labs in the multiverse. And we end up baking usually to then create what is called a control rig additive transforms, right? We start creating layers on our control rig and fix things like, for example, there's interpenetration in one of the hands. There's some slide movement that we need to fix a little bit, et cetera, right? And we end up, and this is very important for everybody to understand because it's almost critical that we end up with a finalized sequencer that does not hold a baked control rig, it is almost critical for success that we do not leave a baked control rig on a sequencer that we will then render out from, because it may end up being 1,200 frames of baked keys on every single bone of our character, which is very heavy, and it might cause issues with Unreal. This is not a, there's a documentation saying you shouldn't do this. This is we've been working with it for a while, and we figured out it's best if you don't leave a baked sequence, right? A baked control rig on a sequence. So what you end up doing is creating a bake animation sequence, which at that point, we are able to export all those keyframes into a animation asset, which is called an animation sequence, and run that animation sequence instead of our baked control rig. And the great thing is, after applying this new animation track, take a look at this line here, and I'm going to jump into the engine and show it right now because this is great. And it's obviously part of the class. This is great for you guys to know. We apply the new animation track and check out this great line, which is optional. We could go back to baking because we may have either A, forgotten about something that we needed to change, or B, need to keep working on it, but we wanted a baseline now baked out. So I'm going to now real quick jump into Unreal. Oops. Oh, okay. I was scared me for a second. We're going to grab our friend here, Manny, which we were using on Monday for class. This is the same environment as we were using for class. You can use whatever project you have open with, as long as you have Manny, if you want to follow along. We're going to open the LS class that we were using. And I'm going to show how to create this, this bake process in and out from an animation from Manny. So we're going to use this sequence as we have right now. This is a fairly simple sequence where I have the 3 cameras that we set up a couple of days ago, right? This is a very simple workflow that we created with a multi-camera demo is what this is called. And we're going to now add an animation. I'm going to unlock from the camera, so I'm free to move. I'm going to add an animation here to Manny by going into track and animation. I'm going to go fairly simple, and we're going to go with idle. And since we added the animation track, Manny now is running the idle animation throughout the entire track in this case, because the track is long enough for me to cover the entire camera cut, which is great. But let's say I really want Manny to be, for example, either a little bit more hunched over and looking to the left. So let's actually make those changes. So how would we go about doing that? But let's do it real quick because it's been explained, but we would bake the control rig as Gabe showed yesterday. We're going to leave everything by default. Now, one little caveat, and this is, I think this is going to be very interesting for people too. And I'm going to actually do it after this. One caveat here, baking to control rig will bake everything we have set between the in and the out. So check this out. It's baking the entire thing. So now we have control over our control rig. You can see that our animation track is grayed out. That means if we right click onto it, you can see that the active was turned off because Unreal in Sequencer makes the hierarchy opposite of what it would be intuitive, if you will. It goes from bottom to top. So as of right now, control rig is taking precedence over our animation. Even if I enable it, nothing is going to happen. If I want my animation track back, I can mute, right click in the control rig and mute it. Nothing will happen. He's on a T pose or A pose in this case. I'm going to right click on the animation track and activate it. And now we're back. But again, no control rig, right? So we're going to go back to where we were. We're going to unmute our rig. And we're going to really quick do an additive track. This, again, there's a whole class in this, and you've been shown this already, but because we want to do an example with this and how to create new sequences, I'm going to do it. The minute I create an additive track, Unreal already knows that anything I select, as you can see, will go instantly to that track. It is already going into the additive track rather than going into my original control rig. I could go into my original control rig and delete keyframes if something went really, really wrong. In this case, it's not what I'm looking at. I am looking at creating a little bit of a slight adjustment. And then I'm going to press the S key to create a keyframe, because even though I have auto key on, remember, That is not going to work. I have to first create a keyframe. So I added a little bit of an additive movement. I'm going to make his arms a little bit slouchier. This is some slight work. We're not going to worry too much about how good this looks. Again, I forgot to keyframe on the other one, but we can go back. And let's move the head a little bit too. And the triangle keyframes means that there is no, those triangle keyframes, there's a question here in lectures from Josh. These ones, it means that these are linear interpolation keyframes. That means that there is no smoothing between them. It doesn't really matter at this point because every frame has a keyframe. So there is no literal interpolation between them, but that does not mean that there is another track on them. That means that there are linear interpolated, and that's it. So as you could see, I did some slight modifications. Let's be a little stronger here with our modifications. And we're going to grab this. Yeah, sure, that works. And from now on, when I run this animation, if I go a little bit further out, you will see that he is running his idle animation, but he's now applying the additive that I just created. So that means that we now have a very different look and feel of my animation here. And what's the end time? What's the end game, right? We talked about how we will bake out because we don't want to stay here. So we will go all the way to the top and use what it's called a bake animation sequence. And at this point, I'll go to Mani Animations and I will go idle slouched. And I will hit accept. And Unreal will tell me, okay, awesome. I created a new asset. And we can open that asset. It will bring up the persona editor. And we can clearly see here in the persona editor that my new animation is effectively idle slouched. And like I mentioned before, we never want to leave this control right here live. So I'm going to kill it. I'm going to reactivate our animation track. And by going to right-click properties, I could even change this idle already into idle slouch. stands for Manny. It's just a cool surname for him. I think Queenie it's male mannequin and Queenie is MF, which is mannequin female. That's the only difference, which doesn't make really sense because they both can run all the animations, right? Since they are the same skeleton. So now we can see that we have a new asset, a completely new asset. And check this out. Oh no, I forgot something. Well, it's just as simple. Right click, bake to control rig. And we are back to having control over what's happening in a rig. And I can keep working on it and create a second iteration of that slouched idle, right? And what I wanted to show you guys, which is very, very fun to do, is let's do a little bit of experimenting, because what happens if I go out of my range? Let's go back in. We will now create, we're going to mute the control rig. We will now add another animation, and I'm going to add the jump animation. I'm going to actually remove the control rig. Actually, no, we're going to keep the control rig there. So we have the jump animation here, and we need to mute it before keep going, because otherwise it will take precedence, as you just saw. So what happens here is I have my jump animation. If I can get it to comply with what I'm asking. There we go. So we do have this jumping animation, which looks a little weird because it keeps jumping. Let's do just one section of it. We're going to stop here and set end time, right click, set end time. And what we can do here is very, very cheeky. We could actually bake to control rig right here. So as you can see, my in and out were just right there. So what it did is it deleted the previous keyframes, right? But we already know that we have them there. So I'm going to go back to 0 and bring back my other keyframes. We're going to bake again. So bake to control rig. Since my tracks are separated, Unreal is smart enough to create the separation. So now we have him, if we unmute, we have him, ooh, probably not a great idea to do it with this not active. So let's activate, let's do this properly. This is what it would look like. Perfect, we have him jumping here. And we're gonna mash them together just because. And now what we can do is bake it. This is a manual way of actually blending, because we can say, okay, I want let's say I want the arms from or the legs, or let's go with the arms from the jumping on this animation, which is super weird thing to ask, right? So what I can do is figure out where we stop on this. We know that we stop here, and we can delete all these keyframes. And we can bring all of these in now. And now we have, as you can see, the arm animation from the second one on top of the previous animation, right? This is not additive, this is being replaced. In this case, we could do an additive track and paste these keyframes on the additive track. But this is a way of blending pieces of one animation or keyframes of one animation into another. Just wanted to show that real quick. So, am I being too fast? I mean, this is for you to then take a look. Take a look later though. So there's going to be also another class on this, so there's no need to panic. Trust me. We trust the process, trust the schedule. It'll be fine. So importing animations, best practices. This has been covered already on FBX, but we can drag and drop. First time character, import the mesh and skeleton. We need skeletons. We need mesh, right? The skeletal mesh is the pink one, and the mesh is what it's going to obviously entail, the same thing. But we are not choosing a skeleton when we are importing for the first time, because the skeleton will be brought in, right? So that's great. So check the skeletal mesh and import mesh are okay. But when we are importing animations, we do have a couple more options, right? So we do have exported time, which is the entire animation. We are importing the animation, we are exported time, or we could choose animated time, and then we'll tell it just the animated parts. Set range, we could change it to manually select the frames, right? Sample rate, we could do with the sample rate, that's pretty fun. I have tried this before and it did work for me. If we set the custom sample rate to something like 12, it will run the animation and as if it is stop motion. It would make it very, very slow. You could go even lower too. This is a good thing to test and have fun with. I believe I have a project with that running. I'll check it out later again. And we obviously want to import bone tracks. Okay, so this is just a reminder for you guys to have, because it is part of the workflow. But the custom sample rate, have fun with it. I'll test it again and I'll see if it's still live, because last time was 5.1, but I believe I did it through that. 0 will mean the default sample rate, right? Importing animations, additional options. So what is the custom sample rate? It is essentially the rate at which the default is 0, which would be the default of where the animation is coming from, I believe. So it depends on what the animation was exported at. Although Unreal is agnostic, FPS agnostic, so unsure on that one. Unsure. I just know that I switched it to 12 and it looked like stop motion. I'll do some more research on that one. So when we're importing animations, again, we continue going, we select the desired skeleton. Now, if the animation belongs to it, it should be straightforward. The problem is, if not, you'll need to do the retargeting process, right? We can't just grab any animation from anywhere on the world and say, hey, I'll bring it into Unreal, I'll select whatever skeleton I want, and it will work. Because it will not. It will do the exact opposite. It will probably look stretchy and dead. So you'll need to, at that point, fix it a little bit. Unreal Engine Marketplace purchased animations are compatible with Mani, because everything in the marketplace has the Mani skeleton hierarchy, right? The same naming convention, the same quantity of bones, ideally. If it is done for 4, at that point, there might require some slight changes, but not too much. External libraries might or need retargeting processes, right? We have different skeletons, different naming conventions. At that point, you will need to do some retargeting, which is, again, there's going to be a full process on that. Before we jump into this, I am going to blow your mind with one more thing, because you guys are not already fried. I want to fry you a little bit more, and I'm going to blow your minds. And this is probably going to backfire, but we'll try it anyways. We'll see what happens. I'm going to go back to my animation slouched, and I'm going to bake it to a control rig. So we have it. We have it baked. And now I'm going to do one different thing this time, which is bake it to a linked animation sequence. So once I create this, I'm going to call this idle slouched linked. I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to export. Now, what just happened is that animation that I just created right here, in theory, is still linked to this sequence. So that means that if I were to now grab an additive section here, making sure that I created at the 0 frame and not in the middle of the thing, and I now grab, let's do something very, very drastic. Now I grab this and do that. In theory, this should, when I save it, update real time and change my existing animation sequence that has already been exported. So this is another way of working with animations without baking and marrying to that bake, even though when we bake out, and I showed this, we can simply bring that track back in and rebake to control rate. We have infinite control. This is a non-destructive process. Doesn't matter which way you go. But the linked animation is really, really powerful for live changes constantly if we already have that set up on other characters, right? So yeah, I knew this was going to blow your minds, and it is very easy to set up. Now, the caveat with this is if we, for some reason, destroy the sequence and it breaks, we are doomed because the linked sequence will no longer know where to look at and it will break. Let's actually confirm that theory and test it, because Unreal might be smart enough to save at least the last iteration. See, this is intriguing. I'm hitting save on the linked animation. And as you can see, the asterisk is never going away, right? So let's take a look at what happens. So I close my sequence, I save, now it's baked. What happens if I'm insane enough to destroy? Look at that. There are references in the undo, so the undo will be cleared. Asset referencing. Let's see what happens if I force delete. Probably crashing my engine, but let's see what's happening. So far, so good. Okay, so Unreal is smart enough to know that the last minute, the last adjustment will stay as a now baked, fully baked animation sequence. So it works. Even if we lose the sequencer, we'll keep our last word. And what I was saying is, we don't, is there a Control Z here? No, that's Unreal is not insane enough to do that yet. If we still create that new sequencer again, and we know that this is linked, we can go and bring in him into sequencer. And we can again, once again, hunt for my new animation called linked. And slouch linked is back. And again, since this is all organic, bake to control rate, and we are golden. We can keep working on it. So I miss it. How do we set the link? So at that point, does it bake on save? Yes, Liam. When we destroyed the sequencer or we closed it, it did save the final thing, right? Again, I just brought it in again and I just linked it again. So how do we create the link? Instead of going to, we right click on the highest hierarchy. Instead of going to bake animation sequence, we will create linked animation sequence. And at that point, we can have our animation sequence linked to that. And since people are mentioning that poor Manny is getting a back pain here, we're going to quickly create an additive track and help him stand back up slightly. And there we go, keyframe. And now we have this new sequence, right? And completely new. And probably need to cut this shorter. And there we go. Ta-da! I don't know why we're not keeping our playhead in playback range. Is there a reason we're jumping out on Unreal? This should not be here. Strange. We shouldn't be jumping out here, boys, but we are. Anyways, so we're going to save this little example here because it's always good to save examples to revisit them. So Alrighty, so we were on sequencer and tools, and I shied away from the next slide because it's going to be an interesting one. Let's jump straight into it. Subsequences or subscenes tracks. So here in this image, we can see a little bit of a spoiler on a shot-based workflow. We see a shots track that we will touch on later in the hands-on part of today's class, which is coming very, very soon. And we do see 3 shots, but under it, we see a couple of new tracks that we have maybe not seen yet. And I have underscore animation, ls underscore lighting, and ls underscore VFX. Some examples, they can be deeply nested and used to break down work between departments and artists. Right now, this example has 3 departments, if you will: animation, lighting, and VFX. So what are these? What do they do? And how nuts are they going to make us? Let's go ahead and create a very simple shot, which we are then going to right-click, edit, and split. This is, again, a camera-based workflow, multiple camera demos. I'm going to assign camera 2 to the second shot. I'm going to possess camera 2, and I'm simply going to move and look to the sky here, because why not? So then if I log into my camera, we have a shot looking at Slouched Manny, and then a shot looking at the sky behind them, because why not? So subsequences, let's go ahead straight up and go hunt for our subsequences track, which is when we add track, subsequences. I'm going to close animation here because we don't need it so far. And as you can see, it comes up as a subsequence track, has nothing in it. And the only thing that it lets us add is more sequencers, right? So what does this mean? Well, for example, I have LSVFX here. Let's go ahead and actually add it. It says 0 tracks, has nothing in it. What happens here is that we are starting to nest sequences within sequences in one of the 2 ways that we're going to do it today. One of these ways is subsequences. The other one is the shots track. So let's go over subsequences first, and let's actually see what happens. What we just did was added a simple sequencer inside our sequencer. So if I double click here, you can see that we instantly went into it, and we can now on the top right, like I showed on Monday, see the breadcrumbs. We can see that we are inside ls underscore class within ls underscore VFX. So what we're going to do here is really quick, create a fairly simple Niagara system from a selected emitters, and we're going to use, I think, the confetti burst. Yeah, it's fine. We don't need to do much else than that because this is just for an example. So confetti boom, we're going to call it confetti boom because we want VFX. We are going to real quick unlock our camera so we can fly around a little bit. And we're going to send the confetti boom into the scene, and boom, confetti boom. Awesome. That's what this particle effect is going to be doing. But what we're going to want here is control. And we're going to want 2 different things. And I'm going to show you a cool thing I showed yesterday in Live Labs for sequence for particles. And then I'm also going to continue on with the explanation on what a subsequence is. So first and foremost, what I want is in my ls underscore VFX subsequence is add all my systems, right? So we have confetti, I didn't finish the naming. It's confetti boo 0, 2, and 3. So let's do confetti boo 0, 2, and 3. So that's great. So now what happens here is this guys will run the minute I run this subsequence into the scene. Now, what's happening here? They are not running. And that's because we need to start doing simulation or we need to start telling the systems, how did I add the blinked firm state? How did I add the confettis? Simple, very simple Niagara system already existing in Unreal. Right click, we can hunt for Niagara if we don't hover over anything. And we go to system, and I choose a new system from selected emitters. I believe you can do new system from templates too, etc. But I chose this one, and I went for in this particular example, confetti, which is right here, the second one, and that's it. I simply drag them into the scene, and as we can see, we don't have anything on them unless we do a little bit of a juggle, right? So the thing here is we have them all in sequencer. They are not running. So I'm going to explain this specifically on particles, and then we're going to jump back into subscenes because it works in tandem. How did I add them? I simply select all of them like I have them right now, and then I right click here, actor to sequencer, and they show up here at the top. I can do it again. Boop. I select all of them. I could drag them or right click add to sequence, and that's what I did. So what we're going to do now is a little bit of trickery for particles. We're going to add a track on all three of them because I have all of them selected, which is called the Niagara component track. Again, remember that systems or anything in Unreal is really a container for more components. So if you look into this, we will see that this is the system, this is the instance, and this is a system. So we need to access it. Once we have accessed that Niagara component, now we are talking of the actual thing, we're going to access a Niagara system life cycle track, which is a mouthful, but trust me, you're going to love this. We're going to add it to all three of them. You see that something is happening already. So if we go back to our VFX, and now we're start talking about what a subsequence is, you will see that I moved it over. And if I hit play, now we start seeing the power of subsequences. We can actually move them, replicate, reuse, duplicate, or move wherever we want in our scene to get some different results of the contents of those subsequences. One of the things we can do with them. Yes, I am holding them down. I am holding down Alt to duplicate them. And check this out. I can go even more naughty. So what's happening here, be very careful with this, is you can see that they're not stacking, right? They are restarting. And that's because both of them at the same time, this and this are controlling the same exact actor. That's why they are not stacking and they are restarting, right? So be very mindful. What I would need to do at that point is on my second row, if I wanted to stack them, create 3 more, right? Because I don't want them to be the exact same actor. If I do this, it's fine because the actor already finished at the end, or it's actually almost finished, right? I'm going to go one step further with Mr. Particles here, because this is all great and it's all cool and dandy, but what happens if we really want to nail where that explosion is in time? And I'm not talking about where it starts, because I can move that and I know where it's going to start. But what if I want fine, like very finite or minute control over, yes to AE compositions, it's over what is happening with that particle? Because right here, the particle is running. Awesome. Oh, it's running. Great. Oh, okay, that's great. It's actually starting. There's one more step we can take, and this is going to be amazing for linear production. We can go to properties on all 3 of them. And where it says age update mode, we are going to switch them from tick delta to desired age. And look at what happens now. They are frozen in time, which lets me do a lot of very, very cool things with them. For example, if we do a naughty thing, which is known as a very naughty thing here in Unreal, we can bring in something called a time dilation track. And we can set that time dilation track to 0.1. And now everything in this particular track will be in slow motion. And I lied because I think, yes, I lied. The problem, and that's why I said it was naughty, is that the time dilation track sadly takes over even if it's not active in the actual sequence out here. So just for you to know, there is a slow-mo button, but sadly did not behave as I was expecting and only work within the subsequence. It is taking over the entire thing, even if it's stacked. Okay. And yes, I can tell you that's the whole point of doing this. They should all be rendering the same exact thing every time because we are on a desired age rather than a tick update. So they're not simulating over and over and over. They're simulating the same thing in theory, right? So we can control this. And that was what I wanted to show you. The time dilation track is as it is. I do not believe we can bake this. Be careful because the other issue that the time dilation track is that it is infinite. There's no stopping it. So be careful with that. There's no right click edit. Maybe we can trim it. Trim section right. Oh, we can actually. Never mind. It is not infinite. So we'll have slow motion there and then we'll jump back to normal. Hey, that's super cool. So we can edit it. And there you go. So what I wanted to show is that right now we could do this. Since I have the desired age, I can now control at which state each of my systems is, which can then generate several different effects and more organicity, right? Organicity or whatever. Make it more versatile, right? It's not the same explosion over and over, even though it is actually the same explosion. But we moved it a little bit. And now we're running a very organic couple of explosions. It is being applied to the whole sequence, and it is being applied the time dilation. It is also being applied on top of the outside sequence. So handle with care. Handle with care. There are other ways of making slow motion. Time dilation. I mentioned I'm going to do a naughty thing, and I knew this was going to happen. The 15 million questions about time dilation instead of subsequences, which is what we're touching on. And I knew that was going to happen. That's why I said this is a naughty thing. So be careful with time dilation track. We can talk about more about that in Live Labs. I will now keep going with our subsequences. So thing one we can do with subsequences. For example, VFX, play around with these, right? Thing two, and the other explanation that I had was animations. So let's actually go outside, go into our cinematics and create a new sequence that we're going to call ls_animation. Now, there are two schools. I already have it. It already exists, and it is right here. There are two schools of thought on this, and we can keep adding subsequences if we wanted to stack them, which is what we're going to be doing. Two schools of thought on this. People run their entire animations in the ls_animation subsequence. I do not like doing that, and I'm going to tell you why. We are changing cameras here. If I have animation on both shots and I go into animation, I do not know when we're changing cameras. I do not have a visual representation of where the camera is changing. I can see the frame, but I do not have a visual representation. That's why I do not like doing that. So what could we do with an LS animation track if we are not running the specific animation of any of my shots? And what we're going to do here is shorten one of these. And we're going to create a third shot. And we're going to edit, split section. We're going to bring in a new camera and to add that new camera to our third shot, and piloting that new camera will go into this view because why not? Because I want to show you what you would use the ls_animation track for. And it is for general animations that will run for more than one of your shots. So what I'm going to do is going to look very ridiculous, but I am going to do it nevertheless. And I'm going to go and set a Shift W and then up and then down. And since we talked about this on Monday, I'm going to open the curve editor. I'm going to go to my little thingy here at the end, and I'm going to go for, I'm going to obviously first select keyframes and go for post infinity cycle. So we now got a bouncy pyramid in the background. And since I'm using a subsequence, I'm going to look through all my shots. And on this one particularly, you won't. But on the other two, you will see a bouncy pyramid because the animation is running here on my LS animation track. So if I were to cut this or put it here, you will see where it starts, right? So this is what you would use, in my opinion and in my workflow, an LS underscore animation track for animations that need to run through more than one shot. Because, as we are going to talk later on today, on shot-based workflows, any animation that runs for a single shot, there's no reason to isolate it on a subsequence, because we would go into the shot and animate within that shot where we are self-contained, we know where the shot starts, where the shot ends, etc., etc. So that's another explanation, or that's another example of what you will use subsequences for. And now we're going to do a third one, which is going to be another stack. And just by the way, we can right click on them, I believe, and if we go edit section, I think we can change their colors. Not here, maybe here. Yes, can change their colors. This was working before, it is no longer working. Set color tint, it's even right here, it has a name and everything, and we can edit. You could even change the colors if you wanted to, right? So we have bouncy, we have particles running where we want them, and we know we have the ability to replicate this. And we are going to continue on with another example. So subsequence, we'll create another one. I already created one. And we're going to call this third one lighting. Let me see if I already have. I should have. Yes, I do. I do have one. And on this one, yes, you can see there's already a switch in lighting. Now, we could do a full switch on, in this case, what I did was rotate the light, rotate the sun, right? We could do a full switch of lighting within a subsequence, which is what I did, which you would use, for example, to say, okay, shot one, this is the lighting I need. And shot two, this is the lighting we should have. And shot three, this is the lighting we should have. Or another very cool thing you could do is, instead of setting up complete and whole lighting changes, which you could do with this process or level visibility tracks, which will be explained shortly. What we could do is also set up changes on the lighting that will only appear on specific shots when needed, but not only on one. So for example, since we're talking about aliens here, I'm going to really quick grab a point light and I'm going to send it up out there in the distance. I'm going to bump this. I'm going to turn it green. I'm going to punch the attenuation radius. I'm going to punch the source radius. And I'm going to punch the soften. And that's going to be pretty much it. We're going to unlock so we can fly. And now I can send this bad boy here and say, okay, there's something coming from the sky. So we're going to go into our lighting track. We're going to grab our new light, if I manage to snipe it, add it to the sequence. And in this whole track, I'm going to do two things. First, I'm going to go 250 in intensity, and I'm going to punch it all the way to 500. And second, I'm going to Shift W to animate, transform, and complete the animation down here. Say it's going to be coming down here to the shade, which looks really cool. So now that I've done that, I've not only done some slide animation, I also animated the intensity of the light. So that means that that light will now be coming down, and we can see it coming down right there. So I did some animation work on the LS underscore lighting. And what I want to show you with this is that these are all workflow tools. There is no correct way of using them. And there is, again, two big philosophies: run all your animation in DLS underscore, or shot-based animation, which I'm going to show you later today. So these are tools. These are, if you don't want the light to influence other shots, the light is not even existing in this shot. For example, you can see the light here on the top left, and it's gone. The change of light is gone, but also my lighting, my little green light, is gone. And you can see that even if as I move this, I am literally moving the timeline, because I am moving the timeline within, right? I am actually doing this pretty much, right? Because I am moving the sequence. I could even, if I wanted to, like I showed with the other one, I could even do, let's see if I managed to do this. Let's do, I think I went too far back. Okay, let's do that. I'm going to shorten it this way, put it there, and then I'm going to Alt and hold down Alt. And now you'll see that it will come back 3 times, because I'm essentially restarting the track, right? I'm resetting the timeline. I feel like Dr. Strange, right? So that's the whole point of subsequences. It's a great tool to have some general things affect our scenes or encompass our scenes on different places, right? And this is just to have more organization. The very first thing they are is organization. Can you flip it backwards? Properties, play rate, if we have one, some time scale, -1. So there you have it, folks. It should be running backwards. Doesn't look like it's running backwards. No. Let's see. No, it wasn't that. It's play rate, what you're looking at. Time scale will, this is probably 0.1. It will make it slower, I guess. Yes, it is slower. Time scale is for slowing. This doesn't look like we have a -1. It'll be a play rate is what you're looking at. I don't know if these have those. It doesn't look like they have them. Animations on characters do have play rates. Let's actually show that real quick in our Manny, and we're going to lock the camera. Go take a look at Manny. He's currently baked, but let's unbake him and let's activate our sequence here and remove the other control rig. He's right there doing that horrible thing. We could, in theory, properties, play rate 50. And he's going to do this spasming, horrible. Yeah, he's, oh my God, this is terrible. Look at what you have made me done. This is awful. This is awful. This is everybody after the fellowship. This is the status of our backs after fellowship. Okay, so I'm gonna stop with the blabbering and some examples. We played a little bit about around with subsequences. We touched on what an animation subsequence could do for us, what a lighting subsequence could do for us, and what a VFX subsequence could do for us. We also touched on how to use VFX and Niagara to control them a little bit better. In Katarina, that's a great question. I don't think so. I think we only get one sequencer, and that sucks. But yeah, for now, we only get one sequencer. I'm guessing that's going to be like that forever, because what's happening on our screen is commanded by our sequencer if we have enabled allow cinematic control. And if we have 2 of them at the same time doing the same thing, I think that they need to switch this to an optional, but I would love to have double sequencers up to. That's a very good After Effects mindset right there. But yeah, I would love to have 2 of them, but no, for now, at least we do not have 2 of them. So let's keep going with our slides. We talked about this, and we've been doing this a lot now. You've seen me doing this with we're jumping now to editing a little bit. You've seen me do this with our camera cuts. You've seen me do this with our subsequences even, right? So trimming and splitting, editing sections, just like a video editing software. And the shots track, it's what I'm going to show you later today. How do you control the play rate? Again, has to be on a animation. Properties, and we go find play rate. I'm going to keep going because I don't want to miss out on the slides, but we're almost done, so we're fine. It's going to be a fun course lab after this. So trimming and splitting, how do we do a little bit of that work that I have been already doing, right? Yes, reverse option there, Chris, correct, in animations, not in sequences. So I've been doing a lot of editing here. I've been doing right click and edit, and we can do trim section left, trim section right, or split section. If we trim section right, it's going to cut everything after it. And there's no clicking here and deleting like we have in After either. Makes me sad too, for those like Katarina and that play with After. There's no clicking on this empty and deleting it. And there's no ripple delete either on right clicks, sadly. So we need to drag and move pretty much. What just happened there? Ooh, that's buggy. That's really buggy. Look at that. That shouldn't be happening. Why are you extending my shot, mister? It might be something to do with one of these bad boys that I enabled, hopefully. Okay, I'm not going to dwell on that too much. But as I was saying, we can move all of these. Yeah, it's definitely one of my snapping options. We can move all of these. We can trim left, trim right, and split sections, right? This gives us a lot of ability of how to edit our shots while we are working on the editorial side of Sequencer, which is absolutely great, right? And we have our fracture back again. Oh, a little alien coming down on our bouncy. And there we go. So that's some editing abilities that we have here in Unreal with our Sequencer. Editing shot tracks. And now we're going to go into takes, which is super fun to play with. So what are takes? Takes essentially are the same thing as they are in, yes, we can, Alex, we can reorder shots, but we're going to do that later in the shot-based workflow. Flexibility, creativity, and adaptability is what I chose to put on the slide. Switching between takes on the fly, we can create several options for the same one, and we have iterations without destroying previously created shots. Now, I always make the same mistake when I create shot takes. So we're going to go really quick into a master sequence. Nobody panics, but we're going to go into a master sequence that has everything I just showed, and I will be showing later today. Because this is a shot-based workflow. This is also level visibility tracks enabled, and this is also subsequences that we were just looking at. To answer Alex's question, yes, we can edit shots. Look at that. Unreal becomes top-bottom hierarchical on the shot space. And there we go. We can literally edit shots. We can duplicate shots as we did with our Mr. VFX. And there we go. The lighting is changing because I have a setup for light day and light night and light night cycles. And I'm also switching the lights here on the subsequence. So you wouldn't want to do this, both workflows. In this case, I'm going to get rid of this one. And there we go. Right? And this is a shot-based workflow, but what I was going to touch on is takes. Now, how do we create takes? So for example, in this case, I have LS shot 01 sequence 01, and I named it shot 01, which is the actual name of the shot. What do you mean by shot-based workflow? I will explain it later. That's why I don't want to jump onto that. I just want to show takes now, and then the next thing will be shot-based workflow. So LS underscore shot underscore 01 sequence 1. Because when I ask Unreal, hey, let's go and take a look at our takes, there are no takes here. But let's take on this button here and take a new take and create a new take, right? Once I create a new take, Unreal will, in theory, and it didn't do it, will create a, will follow my naming convention. It should have followed my naming convention. I need to check on that one because I always make the same mistake. And it will add a O2, right? It's a second version of the same named sequencer. So if I save now and I go to takes, I can now see that we do have two shots as takes. And these are simply, quite literally, Unreal creating a copy of my sequencer, literally a copy. Look at this. This is the copy Unreal created when I asked it to do a new take. If I duplicate this with Control D and I leave it as it is because it's the same, it's the next name, and I jump back onto that shot and right click onto it and go into takes, lo and behold, here we have take 3, right? And what are these? These are simple sequences that I could literally go in. Let's take a look at what this take is. Okay, that's our take. I could literally go in. This would be the original. So I'm not going to touch on the original. Let's switch to take 2. And I'm going to go into take 2 and I'm going to say, okay, let's take a look at this animation. Let's get rid of it. And let's actually command this camera and let's try a different angle. I'm going to put the camera here. And this movement. Okay, I like this. This is a nice second take. So now in my master, which again, I'll show how to create in a second. If I lock my cameras, I have shot 1, and then I have my take 2, which I can switch on the fly to take a look at take 1. Even better, I can be very naughty and duplicate this. And I liked take 2 so much that I am going to use it as another take of my shot. Because these are independent sequencers, right? Again, take 1 is somewhere around here, this one, take 2, take 3. Just duplicated sequences. They're nothing more, nothing less. Unreal makes it easy for us by creating these takes options. But what it's doing, it's really literally duplicating a naming convention, using the naming convention of numbers. That's all it's doing. Okay, it's a fairly simple thing. So, and now since we are on this example, we are going to touch on level visibility tracks, turning levels on and off in sequencer, switching between lighting scenarios, and optimizes our shots, right? How do we create? Yes, new take is a new sequence, but it's a duplicate. It's not a new. It will duplicate what we had already. So it starts from a base. It is a new sequence, but it will start from a base. Let's check out what's happening here. I'm going to Control Z a little bit. So we know right here that we have 2 shots that have level visibility tracks, right? My entire shot has level visibility tracks. I have 1 for visible. I have 1 for hidden in my lighting day. And I have 1 for hidden and 1 for visible in my lighting night, right? So what's happening here and the end result is if we take a look at our levels tab and we look here at the little eye icons, just look at the eye icons. Do not look at viewport. Do not look at sequencer. Look at the eye icons and see what happens with them. They're switching. In this case, they're interchanging because I told them to do so, but they are essentially turning on and off entire levels, right? How do we accomplish that? Let's recreate the first track on level visibility. Once we bring in a level visibility track, which is found right here, we get a default visible option, which I'm going to go till the end of my, my second shot. And I'm going to use right-click, edit, split section, which is one of the editing tools I just showed you guys. So we know that these are 2 visible level visibility tracks. Okay, so visibility trigger, I could go for hidden and it will add another track. I'm going to move this one to the end. Or I could right click on the one that says visible. I could go to properties and switch the visibility here all the way to the down, to the bottom, from visible to hidden, which is what I'm going to choose to do in this case. How do we add levels to tell Unreal, hey, visible or hidden? How do we add them? Couple of ways we can do it. The most lovely one is drag and drop. and drag and drop. The other way we can do this would be right-clicking, going to properties, and for some hellish reason, type the name of the level in here. Type it. Has to be perfect. There's no drop down. There's no nothing. I believe we can do, oh, we can't even do that. So for some reason, we need to type the levels there. I don't think we can drag there. No. So just drag them. Now, very careful when we're using level visibility tracks, okay? Because pay close attention to what I've done here. I know that shot 1 and 2 need lighting day, and I know shot 3, 4, and 5 need lighting night. So I created a visibility for visible on lighting day and a visibility for hidden on lighting day, thus turning off, okay? If I start stacking these, Unreal will not understand what's happening. It will take precedence with the topmost, as you can see, but it's not an ideal workflow. It will not work. So be very mindful with these, right? And if I have 25 sublevels that I need to make visible, stack them all in the same visible box. Do not create 25 tracks. Stack them, okay? Keep stacking them. Let's make an example out of that. Levels. Great. I don't have that many levels. Awesome. This is going to blow up on my face. I'm not going to risk that. So we will do this. Test 1. And we will Control D, Control D, Control D, Control D, Control D. Perfect. And we will now save all of these and we will drag them. And perfect. And there's another thing I'm going to show now. It's going to drive people nuts. Drag them all. Now, all of my levels, if we hover over it, are visible. Do not create one track per level, okay? So another thing that is probably going to drive people nuts is, what is this little circle here right next to levels? This may have been explained, but I'm going to do it anyways. This little circle right next to our sublevels mean that that level streaming method is through blueprints, meaning it needs logic in our level telling these sublevel, hey, load. We need to change that for linear content because we always want everything loaded unless we are telling it not to be loaded through level visibility tracks. How do we change this? We need to right-click on every sublevel that has the little sphere or circle, go to change streaming method and switch it for always loaded. At that point, it will lose the little circle and it will always be loaded, okay? And it will render, it will work flawlessly, it will all be fine and dandy, okay? I'm going to remove this 3 because there's nothing in there. Switch to a persistent and remove this one, okay? I'm going to go to properties. This is an array, so I can start turning these off. So delete, 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 and delete. And we now have gone through subsequences, level visibility tracks, and we end up with folder organization. Pretty simple and pretty logical. If we go into my other sequence here, obviously organize your sequencers, clear your track stack, which is great. Facilitate sharing your sequences with others, right? If we have a sequence that looks like this, is way better than just having a mess on the entire thing, right? So let's go back and turn off our filters. Oh wow, it created yeah, because I was on a filter. It's fine. And we're going to go into LS class, and this is a little bit messy here, so let's fix it. We're going to create several folders, fairly easy to create them. We're going to right-click onto them, add folder, and we're going to create one that's called subsequences. And it's super easy. I'm going to drag and drop, and that's a folder. I'm going to create another folder that's called cams. I'm going to grab my cameras, which are not named, Bad Franco, and I'm going to create one more folder called chars for characters. Drag and drop. And there we have it. That's folders and how they work. Now, The other great thing about folders is that they come with their own layer bars, which means I can actually move the entire thing now from the topmost hierarchy. Instead of having to grab all these and move them, I can grab the layer bar at the top and move all of them together. So this also is very, very great with when I want to move more than one actor at the same time and I don't want to go clicking shift on all of them, right? I can group them on an entire folder and then have the layer bar be my guide, the one we're using. Folder organization, hands-on shot-based workflow with 13 minutes to go before the last break. And then we have an hour of course lab. I see that there are a lot of questions. I would rather finish with the class to then jump on an maybe early break and a full-blown course lab because there's going to be a lot of questions. So that's why I stopped answering them on the fly, but there's going to be enough time for us to keep playing with this. So nobody panics. Let's go with a shot-based workflow, which is what I've been talking about a lot today. And I'm going to actually recreate it from scratch. What is a shot-based workflow? A shot-based workflow is based on something called a master sequencer, right? So we're going to call this master class because I already have a ton of them, not because this is a master class. I'm not that narcissistic. Lies, people that know me know that I am. But we're going to do one that's called ls_master_class. And the very first thing we need to create when we are going with a shot-based workflow is, you guessed it, our shots track. Because we are no longer basing our workflow on a camera cuts track. We are basing our workflow on a shots track, which will let us do way more editing and give us way more control than a camera cut track, right? So, and what is this track letting us do? Fairly similar to a subsequence, but with greater capabilities, letting us literally add shots. So let's add shots. Let's go for shot. Why not go for, let's take a look here. Let's go for this shot, see how it looks. Great. Cut it. And let's create another shot. Let's see this one. Lovely. I love that shot. We're keeping it. And we're going to stand here and edit. Trim section right. And we're going for a third final shot. And we're going for, let's see what happens with it, this one. So it's the same one? No, same shot. We'll change that. Properties. LS and shot 2. Yeah, shot 2 is fine. So we have this one. Then we have Manny with fracture back or fellowship student after 3 weeks. And confetti for some reason. So this now became a shot-based workflow. What does that mean? Well, that means that now I have the control to go in my shots and play around as much as I want, opposite to having cameras stacked all together, right? In the same camera cuts track. Now, each of their shots has their own camera cuts track, has their own camera, have their own camera cuts track and camera, and they are all independent from each other. Particularly this one also has subsequences. It also has characters. It also has a folder with 3 cameras because this one was longer. You can see the other 2 shots here. You wouldn't do this, right? This would be cleaner like this. This is a single shot, right? This is what we're trying to get here. And this also gives me the ability to be to edit. I can do this. I can do stacked editing. I can keep playing with this. This is where Sequencer becomes the editorial tool that we have in so many outside software, video editing software, right? Is it the shot-based workflow and subsequences workflow compatible? 100%. I had it on my master. We can 100% now add our subsequence, and let's go and play around with the one we use for lighting. And it is right here. So you see that my shot is now longer. So we are getting to the end of my subsequence, but it is working. And then we go back to fracture back Manny with confetti. Yes, 100% they work. The main thing you need to keep in mind, transitions between shots, they're not yet in Unreal. No, I think 5.3 does have a little bit, but I can't confirm that. I think it's coming. I don't think it's 5.3, but there are no transitions between. There are no wipes, no nothing. The only thing we can do here, if you want to do some transition, is fade tracks, which I'm going to show right now because easy peasy. We can go from black to transparent. And when you don't set keyframes, that's what happens, even though you have auto key on. Ta-da! Ta-da! That is terrible editing right there. Hey, you asked for transitions. You didn't ask for them to be well done. And there they are, transitions. That's the only thing I can offer you as of right now, right? So subsequences, stacking, obviously on top. The thing you need to be very wary is we cannot stack camera cuts because it will not work. This topmost takes precedence. If you have a camera cut on your subsequence on top of a shot, Unreal gets nuts. So subsequences always populate with actors, do not populate with cameras, okay? That's what the shots tracks are for. We are creating shots and then we are adding objects in subsequences if we need them, okay? Because I am not animating on a subsequence. I am animating on a shot-based workflow. I am animating each of my shots, okay? I am not using Mani on all of these. I am using Mani simply on the first shot, and on the last shot, they are the same actually. But I could, for example, what happened here? Naming conventions. LSBF, what happened here? Okay, this is a bug. Unreal thought because there's no numbering, maybe. That's interesting. So if I do a shot in which I have, let's animate a character 3 times, okay, on a shot-based workflow. So let's do Mani shot 01. Let's try it. Let's try and see if underscore actually works. So we're gonna move these shots a little bit here, and I'm going to get rid of this one, move this one right here. So as of right now, we have this. Let's bring my new shot I just created called Mani shot 1. Can we create a track from this and a take from this and confirm? No, we can't. That's so interesting. What do I need to do? Well, I mean, it kind of worked. It kind of respected the, I could have called it 0, and I guess it will also do that. So let's create a track. Why not? So let's go take, oh, it didn't create it. Cool. Can you do it now? Thank you, Unreal. Thank you, buddy. Okay, so take 1. We'll use that as our main, as our main track here. And we'll move all of these to the side so we can have some playtime. And we're gonna move this, duplicate it, and turn it into take 2, right? So we're gonna go here. We're gonna simply bring Mani here because I'm doing animation. Get rid of control rig, punch in slouched. And this is my animation for my character on this shot, on shot 1. This is my animation for this character. Shot-based workflow, my animation is within my shot. If I go to shot 2, I bring the character again because he's doing something different. Okay, shot-based workflow. I'm doing different animations on each of my shots because that's the workflow I'm using. Obviously, at this point, I would go in and create a camera cuts track. I would make sure that the camera doesn't look like trash. And I would have, it will have to make sense for some reason, right, that I'm doing this. Now, if I were to use Mani slouched through more than one shot, at that point, I would go, this doesn't have a camera cut, that's why it's broken. Again, back to the master. And there we go. Each of their shots have their own character. In this case, they're possessing the same possessable. Goes back to explanation on week 1. We are possessing the same skeleton. They're not 3 copies. It's the same one. I could make them spawnables too. But at that point, I would break it because they are not copies. So the minute I make him a spawnable on the 1, it will die, right? In the other 2. What happens if I, in my subsequence, mount, let's go for LS animation. What happens if in my subsequence, I tell Unreal, hey, let's bring Manny in and let's have him run an animation. Idle. So what's happening now is the same thing that was going to happen before, but it's starting to break because it's no longer obeying, unless I was running idle on this. This is idle slouched. Oh yeah, okay. So it is obeying the hierarchy, but you need to be very sure that you're not stacking subsequences with shots that use the same actor, because that's probably going to entail in issues. We're telling the engine that he needs to be doing 2 different things with the same actor in the same frame. So the engine will not understand at that point which one takes precedence. It will try and go topmost, but I've seen renders coming out wrong because of these issues. So be very careful and be very mindful of what your sequences are doing, your subsequences are doing when they're stacking with your shots, right? That's why subsequences, I use them very sparingly, and I try and be very careful on how I play around with them. Okay, so this was shot-based workflow. We created shots, we played around them, we used editing tools to edit them. We animated characters, the same character on 3 different shots through a shot-based workflow. We're also running animation on and lighting changes here. We also shown how to create lighting changes with level visibility tracks, and we ended up creating our first master sequencer, which none of you will be using because none of you should be making shots. Okay, so that was shot-based workflow for the hands-on, and additional resources in a couple of links here at the end of the slides to say thank you, to end up with 1 minute in this class and go to the next 10-minute break before we switch from the webinar to our course lab, and you can load the machine guns and shoot me with your 50 million questions. So if you type questions and did not get answered in Slack, please keep them in mind or keep them locked on your Slack. And we can go over them in 10 minutes when we switch links to the other thing. And Brian, you're going to ask me to share the first screen. Yes, sir?
Yeah, that would be nice.
That would be nice. Let me be nice to you then, sir. Sharing my screen. Oh, puppy. And there we go.